Hi everybody. Hey, welcome to chapter 7. Now chapter 7 you have a couple of commands and stuff, a little more involved. Okay, and that is that there's the attrib command, there's the substitute command, there's the XCopy command, the DOS key command, and then looking at just basically text editors. Okay, the attrib command, we'll start with that. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. Okay, so I'm out of my system prompt here. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and type in ATTRIB /?. Okay, so the purpose of the attrib command is to change a file attribute, and that's what it means, an attribute. Now, the most common use of the attrib command stuff usually is around making a file read-only or hiding it. But there are some other switches that you can see from this list and stuff that you could play around with if you choose to. The big thing to know about the attrib command is, one, you use a plus sign to apply it, or a minus sign to remove it. So a plus R can make a file read-only, a minus R can make a file no longer read-only. A plus R can make a whole folder read-only, a minus R can remove the read-only from a folder, okay? And of course I can use wildcards or things like that, okay? And then there's kind of a fun one stuff, like I said, I could hide files, that's a good way, okay? Or I could do something like an archiving process and stuff where I could say, hey, let's say I want to copy 4 or 5 files and they don't have anything in common. I can't use a wildcard because they don't all begin with letter A, or they're not all DOC extensions or whatever. So what I could do is I could apply an attribute to all 5 of those files by going attrib plus A to that file name, to the next one, attrib plus A to the file name, and so on. And then what I can do is I can use the XCopy command and say, hey, I want to use XCopy to copy all files that have an attribute that's been applied. Now they have something in common, and copy that to another location. So I can use the attribute as a kind of a switch, the /A, okay, I mean the plus A, as a switch to every file that I want to have something in common with, okay? All right, let's go ahead and see how this kind of works a bit. So let me go to my drive I. And I'm going to clear the screen, just go in a bit. Now this is where my student data is at, right? Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to go by wide view. Here we go. Okay. So I have a file called award.bak. So I want to go ahead and say ATTRIB plus R award.bak. And it says, looks like nothing happened. But now if I use the attrib command and just say ATTRIB and the file name, I don't use any pluses or minus, I'll see that there's a R attribute. Oh, hey, by the way, this original file was already marked for archiving by the editor, by the publisher of the textbook, so the student data files are archived anyway. So if I wanted to remove the A or the R, I would just do the reverse of that. I would say attrib minus R and then the file name. Okay. Then if I go back and I look at the file name by itself, I'll see the minus R is gone. Okay, so attrib applies an attribute or it removes an attribute. Okay, and again, it's kind of a cool use of things. Okay, the next one is going to be the substitute command. So let's see, if I do a directory again, I have a folder down here called music, and I created some subfolders under that. So I'm going to change to the music folder. Then I'm going to do a directory and say, oh look, there's a folder called CIT40. So I'm going to change to the CIT40 folder. Oh, and I got a subfolder called Mark, so I'm going to change to the Mark folder. Now, I did that 3 separate times. I could have just simply said change directory /music /CIT40 /Mark. That would have been the fastest, easiest way, but I thought it was a good way to demonstrate the change directory, again, 1 layer at a time, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and let's say, you know that award file that was in the root directory of drive A? I'm going to say copy I:/award.bak. Right, it's in the root directory drive A, and I want to put it here in I:/music /CIT40 /Mark /award.bak. Okay, so I'm going to copy it from the original location and put a duplicate in the sublocation. Now, I've done this once before and stuff, but anyway, but see how it was very specific, right? I know I'm drive I:, okay, but it's the root directory of award is in the root directory of drive I, and I know I'm in drive I off the root directory of music, and look, since my system prompt already says CIT40 Mark and whatever, I could have probably just left all that off and just simply said copy /award.bak to well, I'm sorry, I:/award.bak to award.bak without a backslash, whatever, and that would put it in this location. But hey, when you start using shortcuts, you really need to make sure you're comfortable with the command. So when in doubt, spell it out, okay? So I press enter, and it says, hey, there's a file because I did it a few moments ago, so overwrite it, sure, yeah, good. And now if I do a directory, I'll see that, hey, there's a file called award.bak, okay? Now, that is in the folder under Mark, which is located under CIT40, which is located under music, which is off the root directory of drive I. Wow, what a big mouthful, okay? If I wanted to, I can now use the substitute command and say, why don't we substitute that whole drive and path for a new drive letter? So for instance, subst, substitute / question mark. Not a whole lot of options. You know what, let me clear the screen. Let's try that again, okay? So there we go. Associates a path with the drive letter. So substitute, drive letter, and then drive and path, okay? So I want to substitute, okay, a new drive, let's say drive K colon, okay, because I knew that I was using drive I, for I colon / music / CIT40 / Mark. Okay, got it. Okay, that's cool. Press enter. Looks like nothing happened. But if I type in K colon and do a directory, I see the folder called award.bak. It's in drive K, but all drive K is just a virtual version of that path, okay? So it's still in drive I. If I go back to my I and I do a directory, it's still there in the full path, but now I have a short version. So if I wanted to say, hey, copy all the files that are in the drive K, that in this case would only be the award.bak file, I could copy that without having to put the whole path in again, because now I've substituted this really long path for a short drive letter colon in its process, okay? So that's a good one. That's a good one that's going to be on the test as well and stuff. So substitute, drive letter colon, space, drive path, okay, location. All right, next one, let me clear the screen, is going to be the XCopy command. So XCopy / question mark. Now, you know, we've all done stuff where we've created something and then we had new ideas and we want to modify. Well, Microsoft did the same thing. They originally created the copy command, and that was embedded in the boot sequences in the command.com file. But whenever they wanted to make changes, they'd have to go and modify that file every single time. So the idea was, hey, why don't we come up with an external command or external program called XCopy, meaning the extended or additional features of the copy command that will do everything that the original copy command do and a whole lot more. So once XCopy came on the scene, a lot of us stopped using the letter copy, but used XCopy as our copy command. Why? Because remember, XCopy can do everything that copy can do and a whole lot more, but not the other way around. Okay, so if I wanted to copy something that was marked for archive, okay, okay, let's see here, look right here, a /A, copies only files with the archive attributes set and doesn't change the attribute. So I could copy all the file indicators, okay, that are like that. I could copy files that are based upon a certain date or time or something like that, okay. I can make sure it prompts me before it copies the files. I could copy the directories and the subdirectories, except the empty ones, or including the empty ones. My point is that it's not important that you memorize every single switch on the XCopy command. That's not relevant. What's relevant is that you kind of know where they're at, and you kind of get the feel for what the XCopy command can do, and recognize the original copy command is kind of in its pristine state. And so Microsoft created this new one. And so a lot of us said, hey, well, rather than having to remember which switch goes with which version, we just all started using the XCopy command from that point on, okay? The next tip here, let's see, let me clear the screen. And I'm going to go back to my root directory of drive I. Hold on. C /. Got it. Clear the screen. Very good. Is the DOS key. Okay. Now the DOS key is something that you already take for granted. If I do DOS key / question mark, this is something that's launched now automatically on all Windows systems. Okay. But there was a time DOS key didn't exist. Okay. You also might know it as the history command. In other words, when you go up arrow on your keyboard, the last thing I just typed was DOS key. If I go up arrow again, that was DOS key by itself. If I go up arrow again, that was my clear screen. I also could use F7 and get a list. Get that list, okay? Escape. I could use F1, right? I could, let me hold up. I could use F1, 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 or I could use F3, gives me the whole command of what I just did. Let me go back again, okay? So let's say that I wanted to come back up here and I want to use the the XCopy command slash question mark. Okay, good. Clear the screen. Now, if I use F1, I get to see F1, 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 F1. Oops. Okay. Oops, because I cleared this command. Okay. So let me do that again with the XCopy. Good. Now, if we start down here and look at it this way here, F1, 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 F1. Hey, that was the whole command, right? Or I could have used F3, right? Or I could use off a list, okay? So again, when I look at the commands, there's a lot of switches. The XCopy, I'm sorry, the DOS key already builds in that kind of history, okay? Also, I could go up here and edit the command. So if I didn't want the slash question mark, I could go up arrow, find it, and backspace out, okay? I could go left arrow and delete just the X, and now I got the copy command. So I can edit the line that I'm at, where I can say, oh, let me go back out here and put a slash question mark, and now I've changed this from help from the XCopy command to help on the copy command. Hey, at some point, if you spend a lot of time editing that line, you might as well just retype the command. It's probably faster, but yeah, your choice. Let me clear the screen. There we go. That was the DOS key. And then the last thing he's going to have to take a look at is just a simple text editor. You know, back in the day and stuff, when I originally started with DOS 2.01, anyway, a long time ago, okay? You know, we would have things, just real simple editors called like Edlin, okay? And to delete a line, we'd have to like do a Control Y. We had to remember these hotkeys to delete and add and move and things like that. And it was kind of complicated a bit, but, you know, clunky is probably a better word. Then eventually Edlin got upgraded to a program called Edit. And Edit is used in your book quite a bit, okay? So this chapter will talk about the Edit. And it's just a word processor. But that was, Edit was kind of the last lived in XP, and after XP and stuff, Edlin got replaced, or excuse me, Edit got replaced with Notepad. And so the reality is that it's just a text editor. Now that's, let me say that again. Notepad, Edit, Edlin, they're all text editor. As opposed to Microsoft Word is a word processing program that the file can be saved as text only, okay? That's different than a text editor, okay? So Notepad can't handle graphics or specialty fonts or things like that. Neither can Edit, whatever, okay? So even though maybe you're not using Windows XP on your home computer, but you're just using your, say, your Windows 10 command prompt, just take a look at Notepad and kind of feel your way around it, okay? What do we use Notepad for? Because we're going to use them later on in Chapter 9 and 10, especially Chapter 10, with batch files, okay? We're going to start editing files and stuff with the Notepad program, and that's going to become real helpful. So the basics of the Notepad, it's like any kind of word processor, but just keep in mind, it's a text-only word processor. It's a text-only program, okay? And so Notepad is kind of really going to be the way that you want to launch, okay? And go from there. Anyway, I hope this kind of helps. It gives you kind of a bit of an overview of the Chapter 7, okay? Again, what were the commands again? Attrib, pretty good one. Substitute, very helpful when you got really long paths. XCopy, wow, there's more than what I thought. DOS key, already turned on, so man, I don't have to worry about that. I can just start using it whenever I do, and you kind of probably are. And then finally, just a quick review of the editor, because that's going to be used later on, okay, any word processor to write batch files, okay? And for instance, by the way, hey, in Chapter 10, I could use Microsoft Word to write my batch files. I just have to save it as an ASCII text file, and then I can execute it that way, okay? Because if not, by default, .doc or docx in Microsoft is an encrypted, write-protected file, okay? So when you're talking about the operating systems, we want to talk about ASCII text-only files and stuff to be able to maneuver around, okay? All right, well, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you. I hope, let me stop sharing my screen. I hope that kind of helps you a little bit, and you guys have a great day. Oops, hold on, cancel that. There we go, and stop recording. Hold on, there we go. Do you want to stop the recording?